There is a number so large that most species in the galaxy have no word for it. 700,000 years. That is how long the Vorthani Dominion has ruled. Not governed, not guided. Ruled, with iron, with fear, with a kind of ancient, patient cruelty that only a civilization with millennia to spare can truly perfect. 700,000 years of conquest. 700,000 years of subjugation. 43,000 species catalogued, collared, and converted into fuel for an empire so vast that its outermost territories have never once seen the face of their own masters. The Vorthani do not bother. When you have always won, you stop showing up in person. They are not monsters in the way children imagine monsters, fanged and howling. They are worse. They are bureaucrats of annihilation. They have a form they file when they erase a civilization. A checklist. Column A. Cultural assets worth preserving for Dominion archives. Column B. Biological material suitable for labor conversion. Column C. Everything else. Column C is always the longest column. The day they first detected humanity, a Vorthani analyst named Sorveth Ka, a creature of pale, translucent flesh and 6 methodical fingers, reviewed the intake report on the species designated Terran Class 7 and made a notation in the margin of the file. The notation read, "Unremarkable. Schedule for standard absorption. No priority flag required." He filed it. He moved on. He had 47 other species to process that quarter. That notation, those 4 words, would be studied by historians for the next 10,000 years. Because here is what Sorveth Ka did not understand, could not understand. Because nothing in 700,000 years of conquest had ever taught the Vorthani to watch for it. Humanity does not fold. Other species, when faced with the Vorthani Dominion, go through predictable stages. There is the denial stage, which lasts about a decade. Then the resistance stage, which lasts a generation and ends in fire. Then the submission stage, which lasts forever. Every species in the galaxy follows this pattern. The Vorthani built their entire governance model around it. They have entire administrative divisions devoted to managing the transition from Stage 2 to Stage 3. It is routine. It is expected. It is as natural to them as gravity. Humanity got to Stage 2. And then something broke in the pattern. The Vorthani sent their first fleet to Earth's solar system 412 years ago. Standard deployment. 300 warships. Enough to sterilize a planet and still have ships left over to collect the ashes. Their commander, a 500-year-old military strategist named Draveth the Patient, transmitted the standard surrender demand. He had transmitted the same message to 61 worlds. All 61 had eventually complied. Earth's response arrived 11 minutes later. It was not a surrender, it was a declaration. 47 words. The transmission was signed not by a head of state, not by a supreme commander, not by any of the titles the Vorthani expected. It was signed by a joint session of every nation on Earth, every government, every faction, entities that had spent the previous 3 centuries fighting each other over borders and resources and ideology. They had signed together. The declaration read, in part, "We have reviewed your terms. We decline. We further advise that any ship entering within 500,000 kilometers of Earth's moon will be treated as a hostile incursion and met with maximum force. We are aware that your fleet outnumbers our current defensive capacity by a ratio of approximately 30 to 1. We want you to know that this does not concern us. We have been in worse situations. We are not built for surrender. Come if you're coming." Draveth the Patient read this message 3 times. Then he ordered the attack. He expected it to last 6 hours. It lasted 11 months. When it was over, when the Vorthani finally cracked Earth's orbital defenses through sheer attrition, when they finally began their planetary assault, when they finally installed their administrative apparatus and processed humanity into the Dominion's labor systems, Draveth the Patient filed his after-action report. In the section marked Anomalies Noted, he wrote 7 words. These ones will be a problem later. He was right. He just did not understand how catastrophically, universe-alteringly, irrevocably right he was. Because the Vorthani made one mistake. One. In 700,000 years of flawless imperial management, they made a single error in judgment. They let humanity live. The Vorthani system of control is elegant in the way a steel trap is elegant, simple, effective, inevitable. They do not rule through terror alone. Terror is inefficient, it breeds martyrs, it wastes labor. They rule through dependency. Within a generation of conquest, every absorbed species is structurally incapable of surviving without the Dominion's supply chains. Their food systems are reconfigured. Their energy infrastructure is replaced with Vorthani standard grid systems that require Vorthani-controlled fuel cells. Their medicine is updated to new Vorthani-formulated compounds that only Dominion pharmacies can produce. You cannot rebel against the Vorthani without first solving the problem of how your children will eat next Tuesday. It worked on 43,000 species. With humans, it almost worked. Almost. The Vorthani administrator assigned to Earth, a senior bureaucrat named Zell Mora, patient and meticulous and utterly without malice in the way that made her more terrifying than any monster, spent her first 40 years in office slowly, systematically, professionally converting Earth and its colonies into a standard Dominion dependency zone. She was good at her job. She was very, very good at her job. What she did not account for was what was happening in the spaces she could not see. Humans are, by nature, a species that does not simply give up. They have a word for it, stubborn, that they use as an insult, but it has always been their greatest weapon. They are stubborn in the way tectonic plates are stubborn, slow, invisible, and then suddenly, catastrophically, you have a mountain where there was not one before. 3 years after the Vorthani occupation began, in a decommissioned water treatment facility beneath what had been Denver, Colorado, a woman named Commander Reyes gathered 11 other people around a folding table and started a list. The list was titled, What We Need. Item 1, an unmonitored communication network. Item 2, access to Vorthani engineering specifications. Item 3, 10 years. Commander Reyes had been a Marine before the occupation. She had also been an aerospace engineer. She had also, in a previous life, been the kind of woman who fixed her own car engine by reading manuals in the dark and refused to call for help until she had exhausted every other option. She had 8 kids, all of them furious, all of them useful. She folded the list, put it in her pocket, and said to the 11 people around the table, "We're going to study them until we understand them better than they understand themselves. And then we're going to use that understanding to take everything back." Someone at the table asked, "How long will that take?" Commander Reyes was quiet for a moment. "Long," she said. "But we've got time." She did not know then how long it would actually take. None of them did. None of them would live to see it. But that is the thing about humans that the Vorthani never modeled, never predicted, never truly grasped even after 4 centuries of careful study. Humans plan across generations, not just in the abstract the way other species gesture toward legacy. Humans sit down with their children and their grandchildren and they say, "Here is what we are building. Here is what you will carry forward. Here is your part of the plan." They do this because they have always known they are temporary. Every human being has always known they will die. And rather than making them fatalistic, it made them forward-thinking in a way no long-lived species ever truly masters. The Vorthani, who can live for 3,000 years, think in centuries. They found this adequate. Humans think in centuries too, but they feel the urgency of it. They feel every year. The resistance network built by Commander Reyes and her 11 people became, over the next 4 decades, a shadow civilization. It spread through the labor camps and the administrative zones, and the deep mining operations on Mars, and the agricultural domes of Europa. It spread through coded messages in food distribution manifests and pattern signals in the maintenance logs of Vorthani water purification systems. It spread through children who grew up with 2 educations, the one the Vorthani provided, which was functional and deliberately narrow, and the one their parents gave them in whispered hours, which was everything else. The Vorthani conducted 14 major purges over the first century of occupation. Each time they believed they had dismantled the network. Each time they were wrong. The network was not a thing that could be dismantled, because it was not a thing. It was an idea. It was the idea that this was temporary, that it would end, that the ending was already being built by human hands in the dark. By the 2nd century of occupation, the resistance had something extraordinary. They had Vorthani engineers who had defected, not many. The Vorthani are not a species prone to conscience, but the Dominion is vast and vast things develop cracks. and in the cracks lived the dissatisfied, the idealistic, the ones who looked at the administrative records for 700,000 years of conquest and felt, somewhere in their alien chest, something that was not quite pride. A Vorthani engineer named Quelith Voss made contact with a resistance cell in what had been Houston in the year 2289. He was 211 years old. He had spent 40 of those years processing the paperwork for resource extraction operations on subjugated worlds. He had seen the numbers. He told the resistance cell, "I can give you the technical specifications for Vorthani FTL drive systems. I can give you the structural weaknesses in Dominion warship hull architecture. I can give you the exact electromagnetic frequency that overloads a Vorthani command and control relay node." He paused. "But there is one thing I need you to understand." The resistance leader at the time, a third-generation fighter named Marcus Okafor, Commander Reyes's great-great-grandson, leaned forward. "What?" he asked. "The reason I am giving you this," Quelith Voss said, "is not because I believe you can win. It is because I have studied you for 40 years, and I have concluded that if anyone in this galaxy is going to end this, it is you. Not because you are stronger, not because you are smarter, but because you are the only species I have ever encountered that cannot be made to stop caring about something just because it is difficult." Marcus Okafor was quiet for a moment. "How long?" he asked. "For what?" "Until we can actually fight back. How long do we need?" Quelith Voss thought about it. He was, by nature, a very precise man. "If everything goes correctly," he said, "approximately 200 more years." Marcus Okafor did not react the way the Vorthani engineer expected. He did not despair. He did not rage. He picked up a pen, pulled out a notebook, and said, "Okay, walk me through the timeline. There is a place in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, in a cluster of unremarkable carbonaceous rocks, that the Vorthani Geological Survey categorized as resource insufficient and left alone, where something extraordinary was built. It took 187 years to build. It was built in pieces, small enough that any individual component could be explained as routine mining equipment or salvage operations. It was built by workers who were 3, 4, 5 generations removed from the people who designed it, who were working from plans passed down through families the way other families pass down recipes or stories. It was built by hands that would never see it finished, by people who spent their lives adding to something whose full shape they would never witness. The Vorthani scanned that asteroid cluster 43 times over the course of those 187 years. They saw mining operations. They saw maintenance crews. They saw the ordinary, unremarkable evidence of a conquered species doing its assigned labor. They did not see what was inside the asteroids. No one who has not grown up understanding the particular genius of human concealment would understand how it was done. It was done the way the resistance network was done, the way all human things are done in captivity, layer by layer, patient as stone, hiding in plain sight. The outer rock of each asteroid was real asteroid, scanned clean. Inside, carved out over decades of work disguised as routine excavation, was something else. Shipyards, not small ones. The largest hidden shipyard in human history occupied the hollowed interior of a carbonaceous asteroid, 3 kilometers in diameter. At its peak, it employed 12,000 workers. It was powered by a geothermal tap so precisely engineered that its energy signature was completely masked by the natural heat of the surrounding rock. Its air recyclers were built from components individually requisitioned from 17 different Vorthani administrative zones, each part small enough to be logged as routine replacement equipment, assembled in secret by engineers who had memorized the specs because writing them down was too dangerous. The ships they built were different from anything the Vorthani had faced in 700,000 years of warfare. They had to be. The Resistance had spent 2 centuries studying Vorthani technology. Not to copy it, they did not have the resources to copy it at scale, and copying it would have produced inferior versions of weapons the Vorthani were already expert at defending against. They studied it to understand its assumptions. Every technology reflects the assumptions of the people who built it. Vorthani weapons technology was optimized for a specific kind of warfare: overwhelming numerical superiority, long-range bombardment, the reduction of enemy infrastructure before any direct engagement. The Vorthani had never needed to innovate past this, because it always worked. It worked for 700,000 years. They were very good at the kind of war they knew how to fight, so humans built weapons for a different kind of war. Quel'Thas had given them the starting point, the specific electromagnetic frequency that overloaded a Vorthani command and control relay node. Over 2 centuries, a succession of engineers had built on that starting point like jazz musicians building on a chord progression, each generation finding something new in it. What they eventually produced was a weapon so conceptually alien to Vorthani military doctrine that the Dominion's defense systems were architecturally incapable of recognizing it as a weapon at all. The humans called it the Cascade Pulse. It was not a gun. It was not a missile. It was not a beam weapon or a kinetic impactor or any of the ordnance categories that the Vorthani's threat assessment systems were designed to flag. It was a signal, a precisely tuned, hideously amplified version of the frequency Quel'Thas had identified, packaged into a transmission that could be broadcast from a single ship and propagate through subspace in a sphere with a radius of approximately 4 light minutes. Inside that sphere, every Vorthani command and control relay node, the crystalline processors that formed the neural network of every Vorthani warship, every Vorthani military installation, every Vorthani automated defense grid, would experience a cascading failure that took approximately 9 seconds to complete. 9 seconds in which every Vorthani weapon system went offline. 9 seconds in which the most powerful military force in galactic history was, in a very specific and absolute sense, helpless. 9 seconds is enough time. Ask any soldier. 9 seconds is a very, very long time. The resistance leaders who saw the weapon's first test, conducted in secret on a single salvaged Vorthani relay node in the deepest chamber of the asteroid shipyard, were quiet for a long time afterward. Then a woman named Admiral Yusra Chen, the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Commander Reyes, who had inherited not just her ancestors' rank but her ancestors' particular quality of dangerous calm, said, "How many ships do we need for this to work on the full fleet?" Her chief weapons engineer, a man named Dr. Alvarez, checked his calculations 3 times before answering. To pulse the entire Vorthani military simultaneously, across all their deployment zones, with enough overlap to prevent any node from being outside the effect radius? Yes. 400 ships minimum. Ideally 600. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. How many do we have? 712. The room was very quiet. Then someone in the back, a young sensor tech named Torres who had been with the fleet for 3 years and was the first person in his family to actually see the ships they'd been building, said very quietly, "Holy language," said Admiral Chen. But she was smiling. The Vorthani High Dominion Council convened its 417th Millennium session on what the humans designated as March 14th, 2487. The council chamber was located on Vorth Prime, the capital world of the Dominion, a planet so ancient and so layered with the accumulated architecture of 700,000 years of civilization that its surface was no longer the original surface. It was the top layer of a geological record made entirely of buildings. Beneath the current city were 63 previous cities, each one built atop the ruins of the last, going down 40 kilometers into the planet's crust. The council met in a chamber that had hosted every session of the Dominion's ruling body for the past 3,000 years. The chamber's walls were covered in the species glyphs of every civilization the Dominion had absorbed, 43,000 of them. They were displayed with the same aesthetic care a collector might use to display butterflies, arranged beautifully, lit dramatically, completely, utterly dead. High Executor Veth Corral, the leader of the council, was 1,400 years old. She had been born into the Dominion's ruling class, had served in administrative roles for 800 years, had climbed through the hierarchy with the patient certainty of someone who has never had a reason to hurry. She wore the ceremonial robes of her office, which were made from a fiber that no longer existed in nature because the species that had produced it had been in Column C. She did not think about this. The agenda for the 417th Millennium session was unremarkable. Resource allocation reviews, population census updates from the outer territories, a minor border dispute in Sector 7742, a routine status report on the Terran Administrative Zone. It was the Terran report that Zell Mora's successor's successor presented. He was a young administrator named Previth Sol, only 80 years old, eager and meticulous. He had reviewed the Terran zone files thoroughly. The Terran species continues to show elevated non-compliance metrics compared to other Class 7 populations, Privethsol reported, but labor output remains within acceptable parameters. The underground resistance network continues its multi-century persistence, but our assessment teams have determined it lacks the operational capacity to pose any meaningful strategic threat. Draveth the patient noted these ones in his original report, one of the older council members observed. She was 900 years old and had a long memory. Yes, Privethsol agreed. A historical curiosity. They are stubborn, but not capable. We recommend continued standard monitoring. High Executor Veth Koral reviewed the summary without particular interest. Approved, she said, and moved to the next item on the agenda. Across the galaxy at that exact moment, Admiral Yusra Chen was standing on the bridge of her flagship, the UESS Prometheus, looking at a star chart. The chart showed the full deployment map of the Vorthani military. 700 years of careful intelligence gathering rendered into a single operational picture. Fleet positions, base locations, patrol routes, the full, vast, intricate nervous system of the most powerful military force in galactic history, and the places where, in approximately 14 hours, human ships would be positioned to pulse every single node of that system simultaneously. Her executive officer, Commander Diaz, came to stand beside her. "Fleet reports ready," he said. "All 712 ships are in position. All Cascade pulse arrays are calibrated and tested. All pilots have their assignments." Admiral Chen nodded. "Casualty projections?" she asked. "If everything works perfectly," Diaz said carefully, "and the pulse functions as designed, and the Vorthani don't have any technology we haven't accounted for, minimal. The 9 seconds gives us clean windows on every military target in range." "And if everything doesn't work perfectly?" Diaz was quiet for a moment. "Then we lose everything," he said. "The fleet, the bases, the resistance network, everything 4 centuries of people built." Admiral Chen looked at the star chart for a long time. She thought about Commander Reyes, sitting in a basement in Denver with 11 other people and a folding table. She thought about Marcus Okafor writing in a notebook by the light of a salvaged lamp, listening to an alien defector describe a 200-year plan. She thought about the 12,000 people who worked in the asteroid shipyards for decades building things they would never see fly. She thought about her mother and her grandmother, and the long, unbroken line of people behind her who had carried this forward across generations, so that she could stand here now, with 712 ships, and a weapon that nobody in the Dominion had ever seen coming. She thought about the 43,000 species glyphs on the wall of the Vorthani Council chamber. She had seen the intelligence photographs. "We don't lose," she said quietly, not as bravado, as fact, as the quiet, absolute, ancestral certainty of a species that had been working toward this moment for 400 years. She turned from the star chart. "All ships hold position. We move in 14 hours. At 0400 hours, ship standard time, on what the humans designated March 15, 2487, Admiral Yusra Chen broadcast a single encrypted signal to all 712 ships of the Liberation Fleet. The signal contained one word: forward. What happened next took less than a day. It is, without question, the most compressed military campaign in recorded galactic history. Historians still struggle to write about it in conventional terms, because conventional military narrative assumes a back-and-forth attack, response, counterattack, attrition. What happened on March 15, 2487, had none of that structure. It was not a battle. It was a revelation. The 712 ships of the Liberation Fleet emerged from their hidden positions simultaneously, across 17 star systems, at precisely the moment the tactical calculations determined all Vorthani fleet assets were within pulse radius. The emergence itself, 712 ships dropping out of concealed FTL transit in perfect coordination, across a volume of space that would take a conventional fleet weeks to traverse, was enough to trigger automated alerts throughout the Vorthani military network. Alarms activated on every Vorthani warship in the region. Defense grids came online. Targeting systems acquired the new contacts. Fire control officers settled into their stations with the calm efficiency of a military that had not lost a war in 700,000 years. They began the targeting sequences. The targeting sequences take 11 seconds to complete, from threat detection to weapons free. The humans had known this. They had known it for a century. It is one of the things Quelithvos told Marcus Okafor in Houston in 2289, and it had been in every operational plan ever since. The humans needed 9 seconds. 2 seconds after the Liberation Fleet emerged, every human ship fired its cascade pulse simultaneously. The pulse traveled at the speed of light, which in this context was essentially instantaneous. The distances involved were calculated so that every Vorthani asset was within the propagation sphere before the 9-second countdown began. The signal hit Vorthani relay nodes the way a power surge hits an unprotected circuit. One node failed. Then the nodes adjacent to it failed because they detected the failure and attempted to compensate, and the compensation signal contained the same frequency, amplified, passed along the network by the network's own error correction protocols. A perfect storm of engineered catastrophe. The Vorthani's own redundancy systems turned against them. The network cascade took 9 seconds. For 9 seconds, every Vorthani weapon system in 17 star systems went offline. Every targeting computer showed null. Every fire control panel was dark. Every defense grid was silent. 712 human ships were already moving. The tactical doctrine Admiral Chen had built, refined over 20 years of preparation, informed by 4 centuries of intelligence work, was not about destruction for its own sake. It was about precision. The Vorthani military ran on command structures, and command structures ran on nodes. The flagships, the command stations, the relay platforms that coordinated fleet communications. Take the nodes. Take the structure. Take the structure. Take the fleet. In 9 seconds, the Liberation Fleet was already on vector to every command node in its operational area. In the 9th second, human weapons fire was already in transit. When the Vorthani systems came back online, 9 seconds after they went dark, restored by backup protocols that functioned exactly as designed and made exactly no difference, the first thing every Vorthani commander saw was the targeting solutions already locked on them by ships that had used the darkness to close range. The first Vorthani command station took a full salvo of human kinetic penetrators at 15 seconds. It was a target the size of a small moon, surrounded by point defense systems that were extraordinarily good at stopping ordnance from enemies it had detected. It had not detected these. The station cracked along its primary structural spine. Emergency containment failed in 3 sections. The command staff, 600 Vorthani military officers, many of them centuries old, veterans of campaigns against species that had long since ceased to exist, had 3 seconds of warning before the station's power core destabilized. 3 seconds is not enough time. Not even for a species that has always won. On Vorth Prime, High Executor Veth Koral was in the middle of a working dinner with 3 other council members when the first emergency alert reached her personal communication device. She looked at it with the mild irritation of someone accustomed to interruptions. Then she read it again. She read. The other council members noticed her expression, an expression no one in the room had seen on a Vorthani leader's face before, because it had not been necessary for 700,000 years. "What is it?" one of them asked. Veth Koral set down her utensil. "The Terran fleet," she said. Silence. "They have a fleet?" "Apparently." More silence. "How many ships?" Veth Koral looked at the alert again, at the numbers, at the deployment scope, at the casualty reports already beginning to come in from the outer systems. 712, she said, and something, a weapon, that our systems have no classification for. Another council member leaned forward. He was 900 years old. He had seen the file on humanity. He had been in the chamber when Praveth Sol gave his report, just yesterday. "Non-compliance metrics elevated but non-threatening," the council member quoted. That was the assessment. Yesterday. Veth Koral did not reply. She was reading more of the incoming reports. Her expression had not changed, but something behind her eyes had shifted. Something fundamental, tectonic. The look of a person whose entire model of the universe has just been shown to be wrong. "Get me the fleet commanders," she said. Her aide checked his device. "Which ones?" the aide asked. Veth Koral looked at him. All of them, she said. I'm trying, the aide said. The network is... He paused, checked again. His own expression shifted. I can't reach. Keep trying. High Executor. The aide's voice had gone very quiet. I'm showing network failures in 17 systems. The command relay in Sector 7741 is not responding. The Second Fleet flagship is... Another pause. I'm not getting a signal from the Second Fleet flagship. In the silence that followed, High Executor Veth Koral, who had governed an empire of 43,000 species for 300 years, who had been born into a civilization so powerful it had not experienced genuine military threat in 700 millennia, did something that no Vorthani leader had done in recorded history. She stood up from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the layered ancient city of Vorth Prime gleamed in the light of its star, vast and permanent and absolutely certain of its own endurance. She thought about the species glyphs on the chamber wall. 43,000 of them. They were building, she said quietly to no one in particular. The entire time, 400 years, they were building. No one in the room answered her, because there was nothing to say. By 1800 hours on March 15, 2487, the Vorthani military had lost contact with 63% of its active fleet. By midnight, it was 81%. By 0600 on March 16th, the Vorthani High Dominion Council, reduced to communicating through backup channels that ran through civilian infrastructure because the military network was compromised, received a transmission from a human source. The transmission was video. It showed Admiral Yusra Chen seated at a plane table in what appeared to be the bridge of a human warship. She was not in ceremonial clothes. She was in her working uniform. She looked like she had been awake for 48 hours, which she had. Behind her, visible through the bridge viewport, were human ships, not 712 of them. Those were distributed across 17 star systems, but enough. Enough to be the unmistakable visual evidence of a fleet that existed and had been used and had achieved its purpose. Admiral Chen looked directly at the camera. High Executor Veth Koral, she said. My name is Admiral Yusra Chen. I command the United Earth Liberation Fleet. You don't have a file on me. You don't have a file on most of us. That was, if you'll forgive me saying so, a significant oversight. She paused. I want to be very clear about what has happened and what we are asking for, because clarity is important and we have not come this far to be misunderstood. She laced her fingers together on the table. In the last 36 hours, your military command structure in 17 star systems has been neutralized. We have not destroyed everything. We made deliberate choices about what to target and what to leave intact. We are not here to commit the kind of action that was committed against humanity 400 years ago. We are not here to file forms with Column C. We don't do that. What we have demonstrated, she continued, is that we can. We have a weapon that your systems cannot detect and cannot counter, and we have the fleet to deliver it at scale, and we have the will to use it as many times as necessary. But I want to be very precise. We are not asking for revenge. We considered it. I won't pretend we didn't. 400 years of what your dominion did to us, to our people, to our colonies, to the 43,000 other species you've done this to. The case for revenge is not a short case. She unfolded her hands. But we decided a long time ago, the people who started this, the ones who built everything that led to today, they decided we wanted something more than revenge. Revenge is a thing you do for the dead. We're doing something for the living. She leaned forward slightly. Here is what we are asking for. The immediate and unconditional release of all human populations from Dominion administrative control. The same release extended to all 43,000 absorbed species, on a timeline to be negotiated with their own representatives. The full dismantlement of the Dominion's military apparatus, and its replacement with a multilateral security council that includes representation from every species currently within your borders. A full accounting, every file, every record, every archive, of what the Dominion has done over 700,000 years, made publicly available so that history can be what it actually was. She paused again. In exchange for this, we will not pursue the complete military destruction of the Vorthani state. Your civilian population is not our enemy. Your world, your culture, your people. Those things can continue to exist. We are not Column C people. You have 72 hours to respond. Admiral Chen out. The transmission ended. In the council chamber on Vorth Prime, the surviving members of the High Dominion Council sat in silence for a very long time. It was the eldest council member, 900 years old, the one who had been in the room for Preveth Sol's report, who spoke first. They built in secret, he said, for 400 years, under our administration, under our monitoring, under 43 purges. He shook his head slowly. We never understood what they were. What were they? Someone asked. He was quiet. Patient, he said at last. They were patient in the way we are patient, but they were also something we are not. He thought about it. They were angry. For 400 years they were angry, and they used the anger to fuel the patience instead of the other way around. We have never encountered that. In 700,000 years we have never encountered a species that could do that. High Executor Veth Koral had not spoken since the transmission ended. Now she turned from the window where she had been standing. Prepare a response, she said. What response? Veth Koral looked at her hands. They were very old hands, steady with a millennium of experience, certain with 700,000 years of institutional backing. They did not feel that way today. Tell them, she said, that we accept their terms. Tell them we request a meeting. Tell them... She paused, looked up. Tell them that we have been wrong about them since the beginning. Tell them we understand that now. One of the aides hesitated. High Executor, that kind of statement in a formal communication, is accurate, Veth Koral said. Send it as written. The response from the Liberation Fleet came back in 40 minutes. It read, Terms accepted. Location for meeting to follow. Bring your full records. We'll need them to start. Admiral Y. Chen, ULF. On March 17, 2487, what history would call the galactic liberation began in earnest. It was not instant. None of the things that mattered were instant except the 9 seconds that made all the others possible. The meetings took months. The negotiations took years. The actual release of 43,000 species from Dominion administrative control took decades, because you cannot undo 700,000 years of deliberate dependency in an afternoon. It took patience, engineering, diplomacy, and a particular kind of sustained will that the Vorthani had never needed to develop and humanity had been forced to cultivate for 4 centuries. The Cascade Pulse was eventually shared, its specifications open to any species that wanted them, as a collective defensive technology, not a weapon of conquest, but a guarantee that no single power could ever again build the kind of dominance the Vorthani had achieved. The human ships returned to Earth, to Mars, to Europa, to the colonies, to the asteroid shipyards where 4 generations of people had built in secret. The workers who came out of those shipyards had never seen open sky. Some of them stood in the open air of a free Mars and did not know what to do with their hands. Admiral Yusra Chen lived to be 97 years old. She spent the last 20 years of her life doing something that, in a quieter era, she might have preferred: teaching. She taught at the newly established Academy of Galactic Relations on Earth, and she taught a class that became legendary, not for its tactics or its strategy, though those were covered, but for its first lecture. The first lecture was not about weapons or warships or the mechanics of the Cascade Pulse. It was about Commander Reyes, about a woman in a basement with 11 other people and a folding table and a list that began with the words, "What we need." About a generation of people who could not win and knew it and kept going anyway. About the patience, the fury, the stubborn, unkillable insistence of a species that refuses to be the end of its own story. We did not win because we were the strongest, Admiral Chen told her students every year for 20 years. For 3 of the 4 centuries before this, we were nowhere near the strongest. We were barely functional. We were a conquered species with no rights and no ships and no weapons and no realistic path to any of those things. She would pause here. Let the room sit with it. We won because we could not stop caring about it. That's the whole secret. Every other species, when faced with the impossible, eventually reaches a point where some part of them says, maybe this is just how it is. Humans never found that point. Humans kept going and going and going, and when we finally got to a place where we had a real weapon and a real fleet and a real chance, we also had 400 years of accumulated fury that had been carefully, deliberately, lovingly converted into precision. She would look around the room at that point, at the students, human and increasingly students from dozens of other liberated species, who had their own 400-year stories, their own basements, their own lists. The Vorthani had 700,000 years, she would say. We had one day, but we prepared for 4 centuries. And we brought the receipts. In the former council chamber on Vorth Prime, the 43,000 species glyphs are still on the wall. They were not removed. They are still lit dramatically, still arranged with the same curatorial care of the Vorthani aesthetic. But the chamber has been repurposed. It is now the meeting hall of the Galactic Assembly, the multilateral council that replaced the Dominion, where every species has representation and no single entity controls the vote. When the assembly was first convened, the human delegation made one request about the chamber, that the species glyphs remain. Because those civilizations deserve to be witnessed, they said. Their endings deserve to be remembered, not hidden. If this chamber is going to be the place where we decide how the galaxy is governed from now on, then it should look at what the last governing body did with its power, every day. So we never forget. The request was granted. The glyphs are still there, 43,000 of them. And at the head of the chamber, where the High Executor's dais used to be, there is now a plain table. Not ceremonial, not elevated. The same height as every other table in the room. On the day the first assembly session was held, someone, no one ever officially confirmed who, placed a handwritten note on the table. It read, "What we need." It was a list. A long one. The first item read, "Make sure this never happens again." And below it, in the same handwriting, the same hand that had been writing lists in basements and asteroid shipyards and hidden camps for 400 years. Steady as stone, certain as gravity. Patient as a species that knows it has forever but acts like every day matters. We've got time, but we've got work to do.